So this sounds like task paralysis. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. My first advice for any matters of your mental health should be to speak with a licensed professional. That being said, I also experience this. I also experience paralysis when I want to sit down and start gaming or start doing anything that would make me happy, like read a book or watch a movie. For me, it's because I have ADHD, and that means that I have a dopamine deficiency. Dopamine is the reward chemical, but it's also the motivation chemical. When your brain anticipates a reward, like when you're going to do something that's fun, it releases a tiny bit of dopamine, and that dopamine is like a little signal that says, okay, you should do this thing because you're going to get more dopamine later. You get a little dopamine as a treat to get a lot of dopamine later. Or at least that's how the brain is supposed to function. In people who have dopamine deficiency, we don't get that little signal dopamine whenever we want to start a new activity. Which means that in our higher functioning brain, we can be like, I know that this is going to make me happy. I know that this is going to be an activity that I'm going to enjoy doing. But emotionally, we're unable to process that. We are unable to actually anticipate the reward. And so it feels like we're starting an activity and no reward's going to come out of it. So it feels like it's overwhelming. And thus, it's hard to start a video game or hard to start a new book. A lot of people who have ADHD end up substituting adrenaline for dopamine. Minuscule adrenaline spikes can keep us going to work because it feels like we have to for survival. It produces motivation, but just not through the same vector as dopamine. But leisure activities never produce that tiny adrenaline spike. But you can hack your brain so they do. Now, this is just how I deal with things. Again, any method of mental treatment should be discussed with a licensed professional. That being said, I have a lot of to-do lists. And one of those to-do lists is just leisure activities, things that I would find fun. And I make it a point to cross off one or two of those things every day. It is a responsibility as much as anything else is a responsibility. And that hacks my brain into actually putting forth a tiny adrenaline spike. That allows me to get motivated to do these leisure activities. And then these leisure activities will produce dopamine. And then having that continued dopamine makes it a little easier to do the next one. Having a dopamine deficiency sucks, ADHD sucks, task paralysis sucks, executive dysfunction sucks. When your brain doesn't have the chemicals that make you want to do things, you just don't do things. But there are ways to get around it. But again, I want to stress, if you experience this very often, you probably should speak to a professional.